This video was created to prepare you to begin serving your sentence in the community. It is important you understand the court-ordered rules and regulations that apply to you, the role of the probation officer, and your obligations while under supervision. There are two types of conditions: standard conditions that apply to everyone under supervision, and special conditions such as a fine, restitution, or substance abuse treatment that may have been ordered in your case. These conditions serve as the boundaries within which you must live while under supervision. Your probation officer, who has been appointed by the court, will ensure you are complying with the conditions in your case. To help you succeed, your probation officer will need to know everything about your life and conduct. Your probation officer will need to know where you live, where you work, the source of your income, and with whom you associate. You will be asked to submit reports, and your probation officer will verify the information you provide. You will be directed to perform certain tasks consistent with your conditions of supervision. Your probation officer will verify that those directives have been followed. It is important that you not return to the same conduct and associations that contributed to your confinement. If you fail to comply with the conditions of your supervision, your behavior will be reported to the court. If you are on parole, your behavior will be reported to the Parole Commission. Noncompliance with your conditions may result in further conditions or restrictions being ordered or revocation of your supervision. It is very important that you understand and comply with all conditions imposed in your case. Remember that any violation can result in your return to confinement or probation supervision being revoked and you being sent to prison. Another responsibility of your probation officer is to minimize any risk you might pose to the community. Your probation officer may be mandated by law to advise law enforcement agencies that you're under supervision in the community. Also, you may be restricted from living with certain people or working at certain types of jobs without making a full disclosure of your criminal record. Finally, if you are in need of counseling or other services, your probation officer will assist you in obtaining the appropriate treatment. Some treatment will be mandated by the court. You will be expected to participate fully in your treatment program. Failure to do so could result in additional restrictions on your freedom or revocation and your return to prison. I cannot stress enough your responsibility to cooperate and to comply with the conditions of your supervision, as well as the directives and advice of your probation officer. The future success of your supervision is largely up to you and your willingness to follow the conditions of your supervision. You should work closely with your probation officer. If your probation officer is not immediately available by telephone, you may always leave a voicemail message. Your probation officer will check for messages and return calls as promptly as possible. If your probation officer is not immediately available and an emergency situation occurs, you may contact the assigned officer of the day for assistance. An emergency situation does not include routine travel requests or missed appointments for drug screening. The conditions of supervision will be explained to you. Pay close attention and remember, it is only by following the terms of your supervision that you can be assured that you will not be returned to prison. We all want you to succeed, but the choice will be yours.
The defendant shall not commit another federal, state, or local crime. You shall not violate any local, state, or federal law. All arrests are reported to either the United States District Court or the United States Parole Commission with the appropriate recommendation. The defendant shall not illegally possess a controlled substance. You are not to possess or use illegal drugs. The use of unprescribed medication that results in a positive urinalysis requires notifying the United States District Court or the Parole Commission with the appropriate recommendation. All prescribed medication must be kept in the original bottle and presented at the time a urine specimen is taken. You shall not possess a firearm, as defined in 18 U.S.C. 921. If you were convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor involving domestic violence, have a history of domestic violence, or have a special condition of supervision prohibiting the possession of firearms, you are not to possess a firearm. If you now have possession of a firearm, you must dispose of it immediately. You may be in violation of your supervision, even if you are in constructive possession of a firearm. This means you cannot have physical access to firearms, ammunition, or an explosive device. Firearms found on or near you can constitute constructive possession of a firearm, whether the firearm is yours or not. Do not be around firearms. For offenses committed on or after September 13, 1994, the defendant shall refrain from any unlawful use of a controlled substance. The defendant shall submit to one drug test within 15 days of release from imprisonment and at least 2 periodic drug tests thereafter, as directed by the probation officer. You are not to possess or use illegal drugs, no matter what offense was committed. The crime bill of September 1994 has made it mandatory for everyone under supervision to submit to drug testing unless the judge waives this requirement at the time of sentencing. The defendant shall not leave the jurisdictional district without the permission of the court or probation officer. Typically, travel within the first 60 days of your supervision will not be authorized, except for documented emergencies. Your probation officer will be providing you with a map of the judicial district, which generally represents the area in which you can normally travel. Travel outside this district requires you to submit a written request at least 10 days in advance. This advance notice is needed so your officer can verify the travel information and notify the district in which you are traveling of when you will be there, why you will be there, and where you will be staying. Only your assigned officer may grant permission for you to travel. Permission will not be granted by the officer of the day or the officer's supervisor in the absence of your officer, except in documented emergencies. Therefore, it is essential you plan your travel in advance and submit the required written request to your officer. No one will approve your travel request if you are not current with any fine or restitution payments, not been in total compliance with the conditions of your supervision, and we have been unable to investigate your travel plans in advance. The defendant shall report to the probation officer and shall submit a truthful and complete written report within the first 5 days of each month. Within the first 5 days of each month, you are required to complete a monthly supervision report and submit it to your probation officer. All questions on the form must be answered, or you may be directed to resubmit it. In addition, at other times during the month, you may be required to report to the probation office to meet with your officer. The defendant shall answer truthfully all inquiries by the probation office and follow the instructions of the probation officer. You are required to truthfully answer all questions put to you by your probation officer. You are also required to follow any directives given to you by your probation officer. Failure to do so could result in the revocation of your supervision. The defendant shall support your legal dependents and meet other family responsibilities. You are required to pay any court-ordered support obligations, including alimony and child care. Additionally, you are to conduct yourself in a reasonable manner in meeting other family responsibilities. Any difficulties you may have in meeting these responsibilities should be brought to your probation officer's attention immediately. The defendant shall work regularly at a lawful occupation unless excused by the probation officer for schooling, training, or other acceptable reasons. You are required to work at a lawful occupation. The employment should include payment by payroll check and deduction of federal income taxes and Social Security taxes. In this way, the employment can be verified by the probation officer. Ordinarily, cash employments are not acceptable forms of payment for persons under supervision. Any self-employment must be discussed with your officer and approved in advance. Other than full-time employment, specific situations regarding schooling, training, or medical disabilities should be fully discussed with the assigned probation officer for evaluation and final approval. The defendant shall notify the probation officer within 10 days prior to any change in residence or employment. You are required to notify the probation officer of any change in your residence 10 days prior to the change. This includes any temporary change in residence, such as staying briefly somewhere other than at your reported residence. You are also required to notify your officer of any change in employment 10 days prior to the change. You also must notify your officer in advance of any plans to acquire additional employment. Changes in the location of your job or any termination or layoffs must be reported immediately. The defendant shall refrain from excessive use of alcohol. Alcohol is not to be used to excess, especially if it results in violations of the law, the inability to maintain employment, or endangers the safety of others. If you have a special condition for alcohol abuse treatment, additional restrictions may apply. The defendant shall not frequent places where controlled substances are illegally sold, used, distributed, or administered. You are not to be around illegal drugs. If you are at an event where illegal drugs are present, leave. You are responsible for the environment in which you place yourself. The defendant shall not associate with any person engaged in criminal activity and shall not associate with any person convicted of a felony unless granted permission to do so by the probation officer. You are prohibited from associating with any person convicted of a felony or engaged in criminal activity. It is your obligation to know the background of your associates and avoid any felony associations. If a family member, co-worker, or other person with whom you regularly associate is a convicted felon, you must advise your probation officer immediately. The circumstance of this relationship will be discussed and specific instructions given by your officer. The defendant shall permit a probation officer to visit him or her at any time at home or elsewhere, and shall permit confiscation of any contraband observed in plain view of the probation officer. Your probation officer has a responsibility to monitor your activities when and where it is determined necessary. If your officer is denied access to you at your home, work, or elsewhere, it may be necessary for you to change residence or employment. Additionally, if the probation officer observes contraband in plain view during any type of contact, whether in your home, at your employment, or in your vehicle, the officer is permitted to confiscate it. Resistance or failure to permit the confiscation of the contraband may result in sanctions from the court or parole commission. The defendant shall notify the probation officer within 72 hours of being arrested or questioned by a law enforcement officer. You are required to notify your probation officer within 72 hours of being arrested or questioned by any law enforcement officer, including for a traffic citation, criminal arrest, civil arrest. You must report the contact whether or not you were cited or arrested. Notification by the police made to your officer does not excuse you from the obligation of reporting the arrest or contact. The defendant shall not enter into any agreement to act as an informer or a special agent of a law enforcement agency without the permission of the court. You shall not act as an informer, special agent, or law enforcement liaison without the express permission of the court or parole commission. This permission must be secured prior to any informant activity and must be coordinated by your probation officer in conjunction with the appropriate law enforcement agency. As directed by the probation officer, the defendant shall notify third parties of risks that may be occasioned by the defendant's criminal record or personal history or characteristics, and shall permit the probation officer to make such notifications and to confirm the defendant's compliance with such notification requirement. If you are considered to be a risk to anyone because of your criminal record or background, you may be required to notify that person of your conviction and supervision status. The probation officer will verify that notification has been given. As an example, if you were convicted of embezzlement while employed at a bank and you wish to work as a cashier at a supermarket, you will be instructed to notify the supermarket of your prior conviction and the circumstances of your offense. The probation officer would then contact your employer to verify that you made the notification as directed. Special conditions. The court may have imposed special conditions on your supervision. These may be to pay a fine or restitution, or to participate in a drug program, mental health program, or a program of home confinement. The court may also require you to submit to a search of your home and car, or require you to provide financial information to your probation officer when it is requested. The following are examples of frequently imposed special conditions. Fine. A fine may have been imposed in your case as separate penalty by the court, or as a special condition of probation or supervised release. A fine is delinquent when a payment is more than 30 days late. It is considered in default when there have been no payments for 4 months, or the amount of arrearage exceeds 4 monthly payments. The probation office is required to notify the court or United States Parole Commission when fines are in default or when you are not paying your fine to the best of your ability. Restitution. Restitution for losses caused by the offense of conviction may have been imposed as a condition of your supervision. Your probation officer is obligated to enforce the timely payment of restitution. If a payment schedule has not been ordered by the court, restitution is due immediately. Your probation officer will work with you to see that this obligation is met. If the court ordered a specific payment schedule, your probation officer will monitor your payments according to that schedule. Willful failure to pay restitution is grounds for revocation. Your probation officer may ask you to complete a personal financial statement and/or a financial worksheet in order to determine your ability to pay. Your payments may increase or decrease based upon your ability to pay. Community service. Community service is non-salaried service you may have been ordered by the court to perform for civic or nonprofit organizations as a condition of probation or supervised release. Your probation officer will work with you to locate a community service site. Any special conditions, whether these or others, will be discussed with you by your assigned probation officer. That officer will answer any questions you might have about these conditions.